Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled People story. My wife and I had been planning our dream vacation to Hawaii for over a year. We had scrimped and saved every extra penny to be able to afford 2 whole weeks in paradise. The kids were going to stay with my parents, and we had arranged for our neighbor Sarah to pick up our mail and keep an eye on the house. Finally, the big day arrived, and we set off for the airport full of excitement and anticipation. As soon as we landed in Hawaii, we turned our phones off and embraced being completely disconnected. The first few days were pure bliss. Sunshine, beaches, fruity cocktails, and fresh seafood. About a week into our getaway, my wife convinced me to turn my phone on briefly just to check in and make sure everything was okay back home. As soon as it powered up, I was flooded with missed calls and alarming voicemails. Frantically, I listened to message after message from Sarah, my parents, even people I barely knew from the neighborhood. They were all asking where I was and saying there were strangers moving into my house. I immediately called Sarah in a panic to figure out what was happening. She explained that while we were gone, our homeowners association president Carol had somehow produced a falsified contract stating she had purchased our house from us. Before anyone realized it was a fake document, Carol had our house emptied out and put up for sale again. Sarah only discovered the scam when she saw a for sale sign go up in strange movers at the property. My hands shook and my heart raced as I booked the earliest flight home. This was our forever home that we had poured years of memories and renovations into. There was no way I was going to let Carol steal it out from under us. I felt sick thinking of someone else living there and erasing all traces of us. The next 48 hours were agonizing. I paced our hotel room waiting to get home, while my wife cried about losing our dream house. As soon as I got back, I went straight to Carol's house and pounded on the door. When she answered, I angrily demanded she explain herself. Carol calmly told me there had simply been a misunderstanding about who owned the property. She claimed I had authorized the sale. Her lies only made my blood boil even hotter. When it became clear she wouldn't back down from her story, I called the police myself. The officer came to sort out the dispute, but Carol stuck to her bogus tale and insisted she had evidence I agreed to the sale. The officer warned me that this would have to be handled in civil court if neither of us was willing to compromise. Over the next few days, I pored over every scrap of paperwork I had related to my house. Finally, I located what I needed, the original deed bearing my name as sole owner. No forged document from Carol could supersede that. I wasted no time tracking down the best real estate attorney in town to fight my case. At last, we had our day in court before a judge. Carol entered with her lawyer, smug as ever. She seemed convinced her little scam would hold up with her fake contract. But the judge wasn't having any of it. As soon as I presented the authentic deed in my name, he ripped into Carol for her unscrupulous behavior. Her lawyer sat there gaping, unprepared to defend against hard evidence that she had no right to sell my property. The judge demanded Carol undo the entire illegal sale and return my house to me immediately. Her face flushed red with anger, realizing she was cornered. Through clenched teeth, Carol spat that she would need a few days to take care of things. That was the closest I'd get to an admission of guilt from her. Over the next week, I watched closely as Carol scrambled to notify the would-be buyers she had swindled that the deal was off. The for sale sign came down and eventually a moving truck pulled up to return my possessions. I wished I could be there to see Carol's humiliated expression as she handed over the keys once again. Despite having my home restored, the whole ordeal left me feeling violated. Carol had invaded the space containing our most precious memories and possessions. I worried constantly about what other unscrupulous acts she was capable of. My wife and I decided the only way to feel secure again was to leave the neighborhood for good. We put our house on the market the legitimate way and ended up getting a great offer. I felt nothing but relief as I boxed up my belongings, knowing soon we would be far away from Carol and her homeowners association. The day we drove away for the last time, I made sure to give Carol's house one last look and a satisfied middle finger salute. She may have temporarily stolen my home, but I had gotten the last laugh selling it for a huge profit and leaving her in the dust. After that ordeal, I vowed never again to live anywhere with a homeowners association, but if I do somehow end up in another homeowners association neighborhood down the road, you better believe I'll be keeping an eagle eye on the president. Fool me once, shame on you, Carol. Here's hoping the legal fees and public embarrassment you endured were lesson enough that you won't be trying your shady scam on anyone else ever again. The next one is a pro-revenge story. My now ex-wife Kate and I moved to an apartment in 2010. The house as a whole was a renovated townhouse split between two sides with 2 apartments on the bottom and 2 apartments upstairs, with addresses ending in 126, 128 accordingly. I wasn't the biggest fan of the apartment as it was a much older building than I had ever lived in, but I quickly adjusted to the wood creaking throughout the night. On the initial walkthrough, we noticed that the only problem was that there was a dip in the bathroom ceiling. The landlord, Jay, promised us that he would get it fixed ASAP. 1 year to the day that we moved in, there was a loud crash at 4 a.m. The bathroom ceiling had collapsed and there was tiling and wood all over the floor and in the bathtub. Now, Kate was typically the aggressive one, while I was more passive and laid back, and she kept calling Jay throughout the day. When she got in touch with him at around 9 p.m., she explained what happened and insisted that it be fixed immediately. Jay rebuffed, yelling that his girlfriend was a lawyer and he didn't need to do anything. Now this is where I got mad. I went outside to have a cigarette and to call him myself. I feigned a relaxed demeanor, and at first he began trying to talk to me as a bro and kept saying, "Dude, I'm gonna get someone out there, but it's gonna take a few weeks." When he couldn't sway me that way, he began yelling about his girlfriend and her knowing the law. What he was unaware of was that I had read the tenant laws in my state, so as he tried to lie, I waited until he was finished and I then recited the law, stating that if an apartment was considered uninhabitable, then the landlord needed to pay for the tenant to stay in a place until it was resolved, meaning he would have to pay for us to stay in a hotel of our choosing every night until the ceiling was fixed. He tried to say that our upstairs neighbor Phil was the super, but he wasn't sure if he could get him down there that night. He placed me on hold, then came back a few minutes later and said that Phil and his girlfriend were out of state. I rang Phil's doorbell and asked, with Jay on speakerphone, if he was assigned as the super. He laughed and said no. Dejected, Jay said he would have people out there the next day. Previously, he said they were busy for at least 3 weeks. There's more to this incident, but it led to 2 conclusions. If you're going to lie, then there has to be consistency in your lie, and make sure that the people you lie to don't communicate with each other. This is where a feud started between me and my Kate versus him and his mother. She was the original landlord and gave the house to him so he could begin to make a side profit. Fast forward to a year later. Jay stopped coming to the house and his mom began doing the pickups. Around this time, my ex and I had been laid off, and we were working with Social Security for food, health, and housing insurance. We were approved for all 3 in April, but we would not get the check until May. When our typical check wasn't in the landlord's mailbox, he immediately gave a summons saying that he was taking us to court for eviction. The day we went to court, he had no lawyer, and going before the judge, here's the summation, or rather a non-verbatim account of how the case went. Judge: does the defense have a means to pay within 90 days of non-payment? Us: yes, Your Honor. Hands over paperwork showing that he will be reimbursed for April and May. Judge: I see no problem. They are breaking no laws. Why are we here? Jay: well, Your Honor, they have been bullying. Judge: I don't care. Unless they are breaking a law, then this case is dismissed. Suffice it to say, Jay and his mother were not happy. Around this time in my life, things were tumultuous. My mother, who had been battling lung cancer for 4.5 years, succumbed to it in June. This happened at roughly the same time his mom came knocking, looking for payment. I explained that I would leave the check in the mailbox when we got back from the funeral home and to please just respect my right to mourn. She took her fingers and began rubbing them together, pretending to play the world's smallest violin. I will never forget what she said next. "Oh, my mommy just died. Woe is me. She probably had it coming. I don't care if your entire family is dead. I want my money." She smiled smugly, proud of what she had just said. I saw red and my heart jumped into my throat. I went, grabbed the check and handed it to her in absolute shock that anyone would say something so messed up. She had finally managed to push a button that very few people I've known throughout my life have gotten close to pressing. I went into rage mode, but not in the way you would expect. The revenge. We were always told that if a health inspector came by to not open the door, I waited until August since that was the month before the lease was going to run out, and we knew they would not extend a renewal. I walked up the block to town hall to ask for a health inspection of our property. It was scheduled for several days later. Now it's important to know several things. I was friends with all of the tenants. Phil had moved out with his fiancée, but the new tenant was a really cool girl around my age named Danny. Tom and Hannah on the other side of the downstairs floor had moved out in July, and Jay was still looking to fill it. The only one who wanted to stay out of this was Rose on the upper right apartment. I had gotten permission and her spare key so I could let the inspector in Danny's apartment, and I knew that I could use the back staircase on the right side to let him in on Tom's now vacant apartment. I also knew that Danny was moving out in September, a month after Kate and myself. The inspector came, and it was glorious. He checked the exterior of the house first, noting that wires were exposed. There was an old empty dryer, along with other odd clutter in the backyard. I brought him inside the shared entrance, and as I was counting on, he noticed that the last inspected dated back to 1994, 18 years. This meant that for each year he did not have an inspection, there would be appropriate fines. For our apartment, we had black mold growing in our bathroom, and the bubble in the ceiling had begun to regrow to problematic proportions. Upstairs, Danny's apartment was suffering from leaks in the ceiling, and it looked like her bathroom ceiling was also on the brink of collapsing. We then went to the basement. The boiler was on the verge of exploding. There were flammable items along with gasoline and a pack of matches sitting right beside it. Two things that I did not know were, the fire door that separated the two sides did not close all of the way, rendering it moot. To be honest, I had never heard of a fire door until that day. On the right, 128 portion basement side, there was a toilet that had blown up. It had coated the surrounding walls, and the leakage prevented us from going up to the floor via the right side. The entire time, the inspector was photographing and writing constantly. We stepped outside, and he said he needed to come back. When I asked why, he said he had run out of space to write down all of the infractions. He had filled the front and had written an entire page on the back portion. I kindly and coyly asked, "Well, how much will it cost right now?" He scratched his head and said, "Around 20-30K from what I can see. But it's probably going to be higher as this house was never licensed to be split into apartments." I thanked him, and he was going to come back with the county inspector. We were gone when that took place, though I did ask him to send me a copy with the list of violations to my new address. So we moved out at the end of August, but I got the updates from Rose. Because he was the current owner, he owed all current fines, and no new tenants could move into the empty apartments until everything was up to code. Because 3 out of 4 were vacant, he was losing $4,500 in potential rent. He handed the property back to his mother and had to file for bankruptcy. Now here's the other thing. Every time an old tenant left and a new one was coming in, an inspection was supposed to be done. Now that all of the financial burden fell on her, they looked into the records, and she was fined for each time she had broken that rule, $750 per. By the end of the year, Rose had moved out, so the place was hemorrhaging money. I sat back, proud of what I had done, and left it be. Haha, no, forget that, I wasn't close to done yet. I felt like I had destroyed Jay, but my real target had always been his mom. I learned that she had 8 properties throughout 3 towns in my county. I went to each one, spoke to the tenants, and said I was a concerned tenant from another property and asked if they had any problems with their apartments. Every person I asked described the apartment in very poor to intolerable levels, and that the mom was effectively a slumlord. She would ignore problems unless someone turned to litigations, threatened that they would summon the inspector, or more often than not, the people would move out. She'd refuse their deposit and sink those into cosmetic repairs so that the apartment looked nicely furnished. People rarely fought back because she knew that the occupants were of upper-lower class minorities. So, being the concerned person I was, I went to the inspector of the other 2 towns and asked for an inspection to be done with at least 1 tenant, if not more, awaiting the inspector when they came. Turns out that she faced pretty much the same infractions on every apartment she owned. It turned out she actually had 12 apartments, but I initially only knew about the ones that fell within my county. The remaining properties in the next county over were given a mysterious heads-up to perform a surprise inspection. From what I can tell, Jay's mom had been in the landlord business for about 35, 40 years. That collapsed quickly. Since we moved literally 1 block down the road from our old one, 54, I got to see Jay lose his primary source of income and have to claim bankruptcy, but also saw that his mother was also trying desperately to find a buyer for all of the apartments so she could pay off the fines. I learned 2 years later, 2014, that she too had to file for bankruptcy. Jay and his mother camped out in front of our next apartment 2 days in August of 2013 before she filed for bankruptcy, I'm guessing to scream at me and or Kate. So I called the cops and said that there were strange people standing in a no parking zone and they kept looking up at the second floor. A cruiser swung by and told them to leave. I know I should have used the 2 months I spent monitoring everything to find a new job, but this was the one and only time I wanted to cripple a person where they hurt the most, their wallets. I think I got my point across. None of this would have happened if you had just fixed the ceiling before it collapsed, Jay. The next one is a petty revenge story. I feel like anyone who has ever worked retail can relate to this. You go into the job and they tell you all the rules and things you can and can't do. Until a customer gets upset and gets a manager, and then the manager comes over like, "Oh, how could you not allow this sweet lady to do this?" and uses their manager override to allow the customer to do whatever they want, making them look like the hero, and you look like the angry employee who didn't let them do what they wanted. Back when I worked retail, I had this happen countless times. "This meal doesn't come with cornbread. That'll be an extra $1.50. The manager comes over and gives them cornbread. "The discount you're talking about was for a sale that ended 2 days ago. Sorry." They get pissed at you, and the manager comes over and gives them the discount anyway. I got super fed up with this and kept track of everything a manager let happen. If a manager one time let a customer buy this for this amount of money, every single time a customer asked about it, I would call the manager over and get him to override it. I guess managers expect you to try to enforce the rule on the occasion they get pressed. They just fold and make you look like a jerk to a Karen customer. Well, I got tired of it. The moment a Karen came in and asked for something clearly against policy, I would just call that manager over and make him override and say, "He does this all the time," to the customer. It happened too often that he had a meeting and got reprimanded by corporate. He mentioned me by name as the one who does it, and when questioned, I told them the same thing. He did it all the time before, and I just assumed that he, as the manager, was doing the right thing. He wasn't fired or anything, but he stopped folding in front of customers and making me look like the jerk. I'll never understand why managers never back up their employees on store policy. The next one is a malicious compliance story. About a year ago, I was working at a local bagel restaurant that made both breakfast and lunch sandwiches. To set the scene, it's Saturday afternoon and we're between rushes. This lady, we'll call her Karen, walks in, asking for a takeout order that she's placed online. My coworker on the register doesn't recognize her name and ends up going through the register to try to find it. After not finding it, my coworker asks her what her order was and tells her that we'll make it ASAP. She gets angry and starts going off on my coworker about how she's incompetent, that she placed the order earlier that morning, that she needs to be somewhere soon, and that it must be in there. She apparently was in a hurry. My coworker goes through the register again, and again no online order. They finally get Karen to place her order, and it's put on the line. Tuna and chicken salad. The girl wrangled Karen like a pro. I get the misfortune of making the order, and Karen is watching me make the sandwich like a hawk inspecting a field mouse. She tells me that one of the bagels is not toasted enough and that the other was burned. They weren't. But I remade them anyway. The next part is really where she reaches peak Karen. To preface, I was always trained to use one gloved hand to hold the bagel and an ungloved hand on the spreading knives. If I was handling meat or fish, it required 2 gloves with an exception for tuna and chicken spread because you use knives with those. Anyway, Karen stops me midway through her order and tells me to put on another glove. A bit annoyed with how closely she was watching me and with how she treated my coworker, I say, "Oh, of course." I put on another glove and wiggle my fingers at her to show the gloved hands. I go back to making her sandwiches. I finish the order and go to hand her the bag when she says, Actually, I don't want those. Get me your manager." At this point, I'm more than a bit angry. This Karen comes into the shop, is angry at us, the employees, because we didn't receive her order for some weird tech reason. She tells me how to do my job and lets me complete 2 sandwiches before making me get my manager. So I go in the back, tell my manager that there's a Karen waiting for her, not in those words, and go back out with her. I clean up nearby while my manager talks to her. Karen tells her that I was only using one glove and that I should be fired, to which she replies that that's how I was trained, and that's how the restaurant is run. We've never had a health code citation for anything ever, and if she wants to look through the reports, she's more than welcome. To which Karen backs down and says something about maybe wanting the sandwiches after all. Here's where the malicious compliance comes in. I knew that she was in a hurry to get somewhere and her sandwiches are still on the counter. I pick them up, make dead eye contact with her, and throw them away. My manager, not noticing that I did this, turns to me and asks about the sandwiches. I smile and say I threw them away because Karen said she didn't want them, and that they'll have to be remade. My other coworker, one that's been doing dishes, comes out completely oblivious to the situation. I give the order to him and warn him to use 2 gloves and tell him to take his time and make sure the order is perfect. It's not much, but I'm satisfied that I slowed her down. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.